Hey folks, I hope you enjoyed your spring break and got to rest and maybe do something fun, although it absolutely has been the weirdest spring break I have ever encountered. But now that we're back, I want to talk about refutation. I know lots of you have posted sample advantages and disadvantages on our discussion boards. Now it's time to go back and look at those and see how can we speak back to them? How can we refute those advantages and disadvantages? So if you have your book, chapter 9 is all about refutation, and I'm going to refer to some of the page numbers in there as I go through this. But let's go ahead and talk about what refutation looks like. So I have this document up here that you can follow along with. So there are basically four different levels of refutation that I want to talk about when dealing with talking about advantages and disadvantages. And as I say there, each one is a stronger form of refutation than the one before. And so we'll start with the least effective form of refutation and move to the most effective. So the first one I have there is refutation by questioning. And this really is not a very strong form of refutation, but always better than saying nothing. Remember, in debate, we assume that if you do not respond to someone's argument, that you have accepted that argument. And so you never want to just drop an argument. You want to say something back to it. So if you have nothing to say against someone's argument, you can always at least ask a question about that argument. And that lets us know, hey, don't just accept this argument. I at least have questions about it. So I give you an example there from some of the discussion boards around our sample dog proposition. So I say, for example, many of you have said in your sample advantages that a dog would make you and your family less lonely. An opponent might refute that by asking a simple question or a couple simple questions like, what if the dog doesn't like you? How will it make you feel less lonely then? So that's not the strongest form, it's just raising a doubt. But raising doubt about someone's argument is better than saying nothing. Once the affirmative debater gets to stand back up and defend it, they may be able to answer that question pretty easily, but at least you didn't drop the argument. You said something against it. So if you can think of nothing, you can always ask a question. The second thing that you might want to think about that's a little bit stronger than that, and that appears on page 169 of your book, is called refutation by mitigation. So I say there that mitigation means to minimize or to lessen. So sometimes you may not be able to totally show that an argument is not true, but you can show that it's not as significant as your opponent claims it is. So for example, I say there that many of you said in your sample disadvantages that a dog would be expensive. So an opponent might speak back to that and say, and try to mitigate that argument, try to minimize or lessen that argument by showing you ways that you could save money while still caring for the dog. They might give it evidence that generic dog food is less expensive than brand name dog food, or that some table scraps are acceptable to feed a dog, thus saving you money when it comes to food expenses for a dog. So I say there that mitigation reduces the significance of an argument, but still leaves some of the impact in place. In this case, the dog will still cost money, but just not as much money as the negative, the negative debater claims. In this case, that disadvantage is still there, but ultimately when we get to the end of the disadvantage, the impact of, oh, this is going to make me go broke, well, maybe now it just makes me have a little bit less money but doesn't go broke. So the impact is just not as significant as it would have been had the opponent not been able to mitigate that argument. So mitigation, better than questioning, but still maybe not the strongest refutation that we can have. So the next step is refutation by denial, which appears on page 168. And this is when we're really starting to get into some stronger refutation. So I say they're much more effective than the previous two. Denial, or what is sometimes called a takeout argument, means to show that some part of your opponent's advantage or disadvantage is just simply not true. And since all the parts of an advantage or a disadvantage rely on each other, right, you have to have a strong uniqueness story to ever set up the change that comes in the link. and the link has to be true in order to ultimately get to the impact, to the significance. So if you can deny or take out one part of an advantage or a disadvantage, the entire thing just kind of collapses in on itself. So this is much stronger, right, than just asking a question or mitigating, because in some ways this is getting rid of that advantage or disadvantage. So the example I give here is, for example, to go back to the sample disadvantage about a dog being expensive. For that disadvantage to work, the negative debater would need to provide a uniqueness story about how financially strapped or precarious the family was before getting the dog. And if affirmative debater who was refuting that disadvantage could provide evidence that the uniqueness story was not true, that in fact the family was rolling in money, then the whole disadvantage would fall apart, right? Because if I can provide evidence that actually you weren't that financially strapped, you're Bill Gates, you're Jeff Bezos, you have billions of dollars, then there's no way that we could ever get to the impact of a dog causing you to fall into poverty, right? If I have billions of dollars, even the most expensive dog is never going to make me fall into poverty. So by denying that uniqueness, by showing that the uniqueness was not true, we never get to the impact at the end of that disadvantage. The whole thing falls apart, and all of a sudden, basically, that disadvantage is gone. So I say there that denial is a strong form of refutation. It shows that if one part of an advantage or disadvantage is not true, then the entire argument must not be true. The last is refutation by turning the tables, and it is the most effective form of refutation. Most debaters would just call this a turn argument. Your book calls it turning the tables, but let's just call it a turn. So I say there it goes one step beyond even a denial argument. In a denial argument, the debater claims that what her opponent says is not true. In a turn argument, a debater not only says that what her opponent says is not true, but in fact that the opposite is true. A well-made turn argument, in effect, can take an advantage and turn it into a disadvantage, or take a disadvantage and turn it into an advantage. If you make a good turn argument, you can turn your opponent's argument into an argument for your side. And turn arguments tend to focus on the link or the impact, right? That we're going to show that you say that the plan creates this change, I say that the plan creates this opposite change. Or you say that the ultimate result of this argument is this, I say that the ultimate result or the impact is the opposite. So you're either going to turn the link or you're going to turn the impact. Let me give you one example of how you might do that. For example, many of you said in your advantages that a dog would reduce stress and anxiety in your family. A negative debater might provide evidence showing that the dog barks and howls all night, causing the whole family to lose sleep. In this case, the debater is not only denying that the family would have reduced stress and anxiety, she is saying that the dog would increase stress and anxiety. If that refutation holds up, then what was an advantage for the affirmative is now an argument against the affirmative. In effect, it has become a disadvantage, right? So the whole idea was the affirmative was saying that, hey, stress and anxiety, good argument for the affirmative. The negative turned that and said, actually, stress and anxiety, good argument for the negative. So it's taken what was an advantage and in effect made it a disadvantage. Stress and anxiety is not an argument for the affirmative. It's actually now an argument for the negative. I say turns are the strongest form of refutation. A good turn can steal one of your opponent's arguments and make it into an argument for your side. So that's really the level of refutation that you're trying to get to, is can I not only deny your advantage, but can I show that your advantage can become a disadvantage, or can I show that your disadvantage can become an advantage? And this is actually when policy debate gets pretty fun, is when you can say, not only is your argument not true, your argument is actually an argument for my side. So those are 4 basic levels of refutation, and then I have down here an important reminder. In all advantages, disadvantages, and refutation, claims alone are never enough, right? We went over this a lot in our value debates. We talked about the Toulmin model of argumentation and said that good arguments are claims supported by grounds and warrants, by specific evidence and clear patterns of reasoning. So any advantage or disadvantage that is not supported with evidence and reasoning can be refuted by simply pointing that out, right? So if someone makes an argument and says, hey, look at this amazing advantage, but there's no evidence incorporated into it, no clear pattern of reasoning, no warrants, then it doesn't matter. You don't even have to go to questioning or mitigation or denial or turns. You can just simply say, where's your evidence? We don't accept claims that are not supported by evidence and do not have clear patterns of reasoning. Same thing for refutation, right? So even though in all of these examples I went through and just kind of gave you hypotheticals, in your actual debate, you would have to support any of those, right, with actual evidence. So if I'm going to claim in my refutation, hey, you're actually Bill Gates with billions of dollars, if I don't actually have evidence that says that, if that's just me making that up, then that's not good refutation. It's not actually a denial argument. And the debater debating against me could easily defend her disadvantage by just saying, "Hey, your refutation sounds good, but got no evidence to back it up." So I say, therefore, these sample dog arguments, it's fine for all of us to learn this new vocabulary and structure without citing specific evidence to support our advantages, disadvantages, or refutation. Will that be okay in your actual graded policy debates? Of course not. And I hope that if someone makes an argument, whether an advantage, a disadvantage, or a refutation argument that is not supported by evidence, that you would be confident to point out claims that are made that do not have strong evidence to support them, just as you did in your value debates. Yeah. So now, what I would like you to do for this week is to go back to the discussion boards, to the advantage discussion board and the disadvantage discussion board. Find something written by one of your classmates, one of their advantages, one of their disadvantages, and see by replying to one of those, can you provide refutation? At least ask a question or try to mitigate it, but think about, can you have a takeout, a denial argument, or a turn argument, because those are when the debates actually get fun, is when we can say that's not true, or actually that's an argument for the other side. So that's the next step that we'll go to, and good luck with forming some refutation.